Hello and welcome to Arcana Indexed. Here, each week, we are taking a deep dive into one Unearthed Arcana subclass released for Dungeons & Dragons 5.24. We are discussing the vibe of each subclass, the strengths, weaknesses, viability, and usability in your games, and what changes you might want to consider if you wanted to use the Unearthed Arcana now instead of waiting for the full release. So if you're a player or a DM who's looking for more free options to use or to allow in your games, but aren't sure which options, welcome, I'm glad you're here. Today, we are diving into the Defiled Sorcery Subclass from the Apocalyptic Subclasses Unearthed Arcana document. I absolutely love the flair of this subclass. The description of this subclass is siphon life into catastrophic spells. The imagery and descriptions you could come up with while playing this class are incredible as you describe the plants withering at your feet, the palpable feeling of dread that casting your magic imposes on those around you. I really love it. As we get into the mechanics, we will start with their spell list. For those who haven't seen yet, in the 2024 rule set, almost all sorcerer subclasses come with a list of spells that are always prepared, similar to what clerics and paladins got in 2014. At level 3, the Defiler Spells are Blindness Deafness, Inflict Wounds, Ray of Enfeeblement, and Ray of Sickness. While thematic, I am honestly not blown away by any of these spells. Inflict Wounds, which was mediocre at best in 2014, got worse in that now it requires a Constitution saving throw instead of an attack roll, and it deals less damage. Ray of Enfeeblement, which deals 2d8 of the worst damage type and gives the poison condition for 1 round, is outclassed by any cantrip a sorcerer would cast within 2 levels. I would honestly never cast either of these spells. Blindness Deafness is a decent enough effect if it didn't target a Constitution save and give a chance to save after every round. Ray of Enfeeblement costs a 2nd level spell slot, targets a Constitution saving throw, and on a failed save, they have disadvantage on strength-based d20 tests and subtract 1d8 from damage rolled from the spell's duration, and they get to save against it every round. 3 of the 4 spells they get at this level are con saves, and the one that isn't does the damage type that has the most immunities in the game. In my opinion, if you are going to give a spell list to a class, there are 2 types of spells that I would like to see. Either spells that will stay relevant throughout your adventuring career, or spells that have a niche use but are powerful when they come up. Giving me 4 combat spells, all of which have roughly the same effect, that being low amounts of damage or Constitution saves against having disadvantage until they succeed, it's hard to justify why I'd want all of these spells. At 5th level, we get Bestow Curse and Vampiric Touch. Again, the theme on these is really on point, and I love the imagery, but both are touch spells, and with our little d6 hit die, I'd be very worried about getting into touch range, and frankly, if you still have your 3rd level spell slots and are in touch range, you already kinda messed up. A+ for being on brand, but D- on the power level for these spells. At 7th level, we are looking at Blight and Hallucinatory Terrain. I'll talk more about Blight a little bit later on, but overall, not the best spell you will find. Hallucinatory Terrain is one of those spells I was talking about earlier. It is a spell that I would never pick if I had the choice, but when it comes up, and it probably will at least once during your campaign, you will be very glad you have it. At 9th level, we pick up Anti-Life Shell and Contagion. Anti-Life Shell is really interesting because it has anti-synergy with all of the touch spells we picked up earlier on the list. It has uses, but it is concentration, and defensive concentration spells are kind of tough. If I'm using my concentration, I want to either be controlling enemies or giving out the most devastating condition you can, the dead condition. Contagion is a decent spell, but again, a Constitution saving throw, and if they succeed, it does nothing. It's touch range, and it does an okay amount of damage, but I definitely expect more from a 5th level spell. Okay, so the spell list leaves a lot to be desired. It does maybe think that maybe we need more necrotic themed spells in this edition. Maybe whenever this book comes out, it will include more spells specifically for this spell list. Shall we move on to class features and see if we can redeem ourselves? At 3rd level, we get Defile and Empower. This tells us that once per turn, when you roll damage for a spell you cast using a spell slot, you can roll a number of your unexpended hit point dice up to a number equal to half the level of the spell slot expended, round up, and add the total roll to one damage roll of the spell. Now, what does this actually mean? Essentially, when you do damage, you can use your own hit dice to add damage to one damage roll of the spell. So if you cast Fireball with a 3rd level spell slot, you can roll up to 2 of your hit dice and add that to the damage. It's fairly straightforward up to this point. You are spending your own life energy to deal more damage with your spells, but it does get a little more complicated. The second part of this feature is Lifesteal. This says instead of drawing on your own life force, you can try to steal the life from another creature you can see within 30 feet of yourself. That creature makes a Constitution saving throw against your spell DC. On a failed save, you can use the hit die of the creature you selected. However, the number of hit dice you can use is rounded down when used this way. Once a creature has failed this saving throw, you can't use this feature again unless you expend 3 sorcery points. Now, monster hit dice is kind of a strange thing, because monster hit dice are tied to the creature size. Medium creatures have a D8, large creatures use D10s, huge creatures use D12s, and gargantuan creatures use D20s. I guess for completion's sake, small creatures use D6 and tiny creatures use D4s. So, generally speaking, the larger the hit die, the larger the creature, and the higher the Constitution saving throw. This kind of makes its own balance. Where it gets a little bit thrown off is we are told in the player's handbook, now creatures can willingly fail their saving throw. Now, why would a creature willingly fail its saving throw? When the sorcerer targets the party's barbarian with this feature. Reliably adding a D12 hit die instead of a D6 is a very solid improvement. That being said, we also have to discuss adding damage to one roll because of a specific interaction. That interaction is the Magic Missile spell. The question is, how many times do you roll for a Magic Missile spell? When asked this question, Jeremy Crawford responded in a tweet, "Magic Missile, rules as written, you roll 1 damage die. Rules as intended, it doesn't matter, you choose." Except in this case, it very much does matter. Because if you cast Magic Missile using a 3rd level spell slot and empower it in this way, it deals 1 plus 1d4 plus 1d12 for your barbarian's hit die, for a total of 10 damage per dart, for 5 darts and a total of 50 average damage with no attack roll, no saving throw. For comparison, the 4th level Blight spell that you get from your Always Prepared list does an average of 36 damage to one target on a failed save, and half as much on a success. If you want to see how this scales, Magic Missile cast with a 4th level spell slot could use 2 of those barbarian hit dice for 1 plus 1d4 plus 2d12 times 6 darts for an average of 99 force damage with no attack roll, no saving throw. Again, for comparison, a 6th level Disintegrate spell does an average of 75 damage. Even if you are using your own hit dice, it can get out of hand very quickly. So it is important to be very aware of this interaction, and if you plan on using this, please discuss it with your DM before the game. DMs, if you are allowing this subclass as written at your table, make sure you are aware of how strong this can get, and I would certainly allow the empowered side of this feature to only interact with 1 dart. This should help bring things back into balance. Now that we have that discussion out of the way, at 6th level, you get the Corrupted Caster feature. This has 2 different effects as well, the first being Defiler's Ward. This says when you convert sorcery points into spell slots, you can roll a number of d6s equal to the level of the spell slot you create, and you gain that many temporary hit points. It also says if a creature hits you with a melee attack while you have temporary hit points, the creature takes necrotic or poison damage equal to your charisma modifier. I will say, this feature doesn't specify that the temporary hit points have to be from this feature in order to deal the damage. But at my table, I would probably make that stipulation, since in 2024, there are a lot of features that give temporary hit points. You also get Strengthened Rot, which says that your sorcerer spells and features that deal necrotic and poison damage ignore resistance. In the monster manual, there are 23 monsters resistant to necrotic damage. Most of them are celestials and vampires, so this will come up on occasion. However, there are exactly 6 monsters with poison resistance, and 2 of them are badgers. Depending on the setting, or if there are an abundance of dwarves in your games, this might come up more often, but it's not as prevalent as you might think. At 14th level, you get the Withering Aura feature. When you use your innate sorcery feature, this also creates an aura in a 15-foot emanation that has 2 effects. First, when a creature within the emanation hits you with an attack roll, you can reduce the damage by your charisma modifier. This will make you a little bit more durable, which is important given how many spells you have that require touch. Importantly, this damage reduction doesn't require your reaction, it just happens. Second, when a creature dies within that area, you regain 1d4 sorcery points. You can only regain these points once per use of innate sorcery. Now, let's talk about this feature for a second. Since level 7, all sorcerers have the Sorcery Incarnate feature. This allows you to spend 2 sorcery points to gain another use of your innate sorcery feature. So if every time you use Sorcery Incarnate, you regain 1d4 or 2.5 on average sorcery points, on average, this could be an infinite sorcery point hack. I will remind DMs that in Chapter 1 of the DMG, it covers players exploiting the rules. This is another case where you might want to make clear that using a bag of rats to completely refresh sorcery points and spell slots between encounters will not be allowed. Otherwise, this is a great feature. For those that don't know, a bag of rats is an exploit some players in the past editions have used to initiate combat, so they can get a buff of some kind that was intended to be used only in combat. For example, a Pact of the Fiend Warlock could use this to gain temporary HP before going into combat to provide a little more help. Honestly, prior to this feature, I have never seen the Bag of Rats be a great game-breaking exploit. But in this case, it truly could be used to seriously break the balance of your game. At level 18, you gain the feature Superior Defiler. This gives you another 2 benefits. First, you become immune to the poisoned and exhaustion conditions. Immunity to the poison condition is good, as there are a lot of creatures in the game, especially at later levels, that can poison. However, immunity to poison is not incredibly hard to come by. Before important fights, you will likely be using Hero's Feast to gain immunity to the poison condition. However, exhaustion immunity is always a great thing. The second part of this feature is that the size of your Withering Aura increases to 30 feet, and enemies can't regain hit points while in your aura. If you have a gladiator from last week's video in your party, this could be extremely relevant, but otherwise it will still come up from time to time. All told, this subclass is kind of all over the place. The spell list leaves a lot to be desired, but depending on how you rule things at your table, some of the features could be absolutely devastating to the game balance. If you're going to use this as written, I would strongly advise you talk about these things with your table and make sure everyone is clear with the interpretation before you go into it. But the flavor is incredible, and with good faith interpretations of the features, it could definitely be one of the most fun sorcerers at the table. If you enjoyed the discussion today, I'd ask you please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and letting me know your thoughts in the comments below. I hope all of you have a wonderful week, and until next time.